Chapter 11 of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Betty B. Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America, by Frank Carpenter. Chapter 11. Travels in Bolivia. La Paz, the chief city of Bolivia, is only 45 miles from Lake Titicaca, and we might go there by train. We prefer to take a stage drawn by 8 mules. We go on the gallop all day long, stopping only to change mules every 3 hours. We sit outside with the driver. He is an Indian. He has a little pile of stones beside him, from which he now and then makes a good throw at the long ears of such of the animals as are lagging behind. The ride is delightful. The air is always bracing on the high plateau of Bolivia. It is so clear we can see for miles. To the east is a great wall of snow mountains, with Illimani rising above the rest of the peaks, and away off to the west are lower hills, which seem to climb over one another and finally end in snow at the sky. Now we pass a mud hut, and now a flock of llamas, alpacas, or sheep feeding on the thin grass. But other than this, there is nothing about us but the sky, the plains, and the mountains. As we near the close of the day, we look for the city to which we are going. We are hungry, and wonder whether we shall get there before dark, when at last the driver pulls up the mules on their haunches, and the stage stops. We are on the brink of a precipice, and there, 1,000 feet below us, in a little gorge in the mountains, is the curious city of La Paz. It is so far down that we can hardly distinguish the houses. They look like a jumble of bright-colored boxes, with trees here and there rising out above their red roofs. They grow plainer as we gallop on our winding way down the steep slopes of the hill. We are soon riding between walled gardens, and at last the stage stops in the heart of the town. How queer it all is! Most of the people about us are clad in the brightest of reds, blues, and greens. Every other man wears a poncho or blanket with his head through a hole in the center, and some of the women have striped shawls, bright-colored short skirts, and queerly shaped hats. 5/8 of the people are Indians, and the remainders are whites and of the mixed race of Indians and whites called cholos. Even the houses are a blaze of bright colors. Their walls are painted in the most delicate tints of red, blue, and green. There is a lavender grocery store. Next to it, a shoe shop of rose pink, and farther on are other establishments of cream and sky blue. The houses are of 1 or 2 stories. The shops are open to the street, so that we can see all that goes on within. But where can we get a cab to carry our baggage to the hotel? It is not on the electric car line, and there are but few cabs in La Paz. The streets are so narrow and so steep that most of the freighting is done by donkeys, ponies, llamas, and men. The Indian porters will carry our boxes. There are a dozen porters about the stage office. We give each man a trunk, and he trots off to the hotel up the hills with the trunk on his back, while we walk behind. The next morning we start out for a tour of the city, going up the hills very slowly, for the air is so thin that we are soon out of breath. We visit the markets. It is early morning, but the streets are filled with buyers and sellers, with Indians, cholos, and whites dressed in all colors of the rainbow. There are scores of Indian women carrying fruit and vegetables to the markets for sale. Their burdens are tied up in striped blankets of blue, red, yellow, and green, and they bend half double as they walk onward. They squat down on the streets and spread their wares out before them, peddling them by the piece or the pile. There are Indian men wearing bright ponchos, and such a lot of Indian babies that we have to pick our way carefully to keep from treading upon them. Some lie on the cold stones and play with the merchandise their mothers are selling. Some are too young to crawl, and their big eyes peep out of the shawls in which they are tied to the backs of their mothers. Most of the babies are laughing. There is one crying, and over there is another which has crawled away from its mother, and is almost under the feet of those llamas which are coming up the street. Now its mother sees it and runs to save it. Stop and look at the queer things for sale all about us. What funny potatoes! Those in that pile are not bigger than chestnuts, and they are as pink as the toes of the baby who is playing among them. There are some of a violet color, while those in the next pile are as black as your boots. The white ones beside that woman over the way are chuno, and they have been frozen for sale. What a variety of fruits! We find some on every corner, and the market is filled with quinces, peaches, and pears, as well as oranges, lemons, and pineapples. The fruit all comes from the lands lower down, for it is only a few days' ride on muleback from here to the tropical valleys of the Andes, and there are all kinds of climates farther down the mountains, and all kinds of fruits. What are those big green bean pods that woman is selling? They are not beans at all. They are a kind of fruit which is eaten raw. If you will buy one and break it open, you will see that the seeds within it are embedded in a pulp which looks like spun milk. We smack our lips as we eat it, for when it is cold it is very much like finely flavored ice cream. Is this not a wonderful country where all kinds of fruits grow so near together? Yes, indeed. Bolivia is naturally one of the rich countries of the world. In the eastern part of it, below the plateau, there are great plains upon which vast herds of cattle are feeding. In its forests there are rubber trees, from which the sap is gathered and shipped down the Beni and Madeira to the mouth of the Amazon, whence it is sent all over the world to be used for making tires, coats, overshoes, and all sorts of such things. There are parts of Bolivia that have never been explored, and we could easily ride down the eastern slopes of the mountains and come into a region inhabited only by the most savage of Indians. Some of the wild Indians are cannibals. Some go about naked, and some wear plates of wood and metal in the lobes of their ears, each plate being as large as a silver dollar. Many of them make war upon white men, and some use blow guns, with which they shoot poisoned arrows at their enemies. The guns are reeds from 10 to 12 feet long, and the slightest scratch of one of the arrows causes immediate death. On the eastern slopes of the Andes, by a very short ride on muleback, we could reach the Yungas Valley, where there are plantations of coffee, coca, and cinchona trees. Have you ever heard of cinchona? Perhaps not, but I venture every one of you has sometime had to take quinine. Quinine is the bitter white powder made from the bark of the cinchona tree. It is especially good for malarial fevers, and we shall need some later on when we go up the Amazon. We see loads of cinchona bark on the streets of La Paz. That little donkey which is just turning the corner has a bundle of it on each side of his back. Other donkeys are coming behind him, each of which carries a load. That drove is bringing the bark into La Paz. Here it will be repacked and shipped to all parts of the world. Let us go and pull out a piece of the bark and take a bite of it. How bitter it is! It tastes like quinine. Bolivia yields some of the best cinchona, although a great deal is raised in Java and in Peru and all along the eastern slopes of the Andes between here and Colombia. Plantations have been recently started for raising cinchona trees. 6 years after planting, the trees are cut down and their bark stripped off for quinine. At this age each tree will produce about 4 pounds of bark. The next year after cutting, sprouts will come up from the stumps, and 6 years later another crop is ready for harvest. The most of the quinine furnished by Bolivia comes from wild trees. The bark we tasted on the streets of La Paz was gathered from the forests at the head of the Beni River. It was carried through the woods for miles on the backs of Indians, and was then loaded upon the donkeys which brought it to La Paz. But what is that we see on those other donkeys which are now going by us? The bundles are of about the same size as the cinchona bundles, but the stuff within them look like leaves. That is coca leaves, from which cocaine, a drug used to deaden pain, is made. Dentists often put cocaine in a sensitive tooth when it has to be filled. Coca is also used by the Indians on the Bolivian plateau as a chew. Every Indian we meet has a lump of coca inside his cheek, and men, women, and children are chewing it all day long. The Indians in the mines will not work unless their employers give them, in addition to their wages, some coca to chew every day, and all of the Indians would rather have coca than coffee, tea, or tobacco. Vast quantities of it are produced every year, and are shipped on llamas and donkeys to all parts of Bolivia, to Peru, and to Chile. You must not confound coca with chocolate, or cacao, which is sometimes called cocoa, nor with the cocoanut tree. The coca plant is a shrub which grows from 4 to 6 feet in height. It has leaves much like our wintergreen shrub. They are very stimulating, and the Indians tell us that chewing coca will keep out the cold and also satisfy hunger. We try a chew ourselves, putting some lime with it as the Indians do. The leaves taste rather bitter, the lime burns our tongues, and as the habit seems very disgusting, we decide to leave coca alone. End of chapter 11.
Chapter 12 of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Andrea Kay. Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America, by Frank Carpenter. Chapter 12. The Mineral Wealth of the Andes. At La Paz, we are not far from some of the richest mining regions of the world. The lofty Andes throughout their whole length, from the Isthmus of Panama to the Strait of Magellan, contain some gold. The Cerrado Range, which now looks down upon us, has rich veins of tin, and vast quantities of copper are yearly taken out of the mountains to the north and to the south. There is so much gold on the east slope of the Peruvian Andes that during the floods the streams wash down grains and nuggets of gold. Many of the streams are dry part of the year, and the Indians have paved them with stones so that the heavy gold is caught in the cracks when it drops. The golden grains are thus carried down when the rivers are high, and so caught that they can be picked up when the streams fall. This was one of the gold mining methods of the Incas, and it was thus that much of the gold which the Spaniards took from them was gathered. We see men washing gold in many places as we ride through Bolivia. The miners are Indians employed by the white men. There are some at work near La Paz. They take the gravel and dirt to the sides of the streams and roll it about in wooden bowls as big as those in which we knead bread. From time to time, they dip up a little water into the bowl and shake it around so that all the dirt melts into the water and can be poured out. After a while, there is nothing but the gold and the gravel. The miners throw the gravel away handful by handful, first looking it carefully over and dropping back into the bowl the little yellow bits which they see. Finally, all the gravel has been thrown out, and there is left a little pile of yellow pebbles and grains, some of which are not bigger than the end of a needle. This is the gold. Such methods of mining are wasteful, for much of the gold dust is so small that the grains cannot be seen. It is only lately that mercury and other modern means which we employ to collect gold have been much used. When we visit the silver mines, we find that most of the work there is done with rude tools. In the older mines, the Indians use hammers and drills to break up the ore. They carry it out of the mines on their backs in sacks of rawhide. Silver is found in veins of ore in the rocks, and these veins often extend far down under the earth. Some of the mines are hence very deep. The Indians climb out of them upon ladders or notched sticks with heavy sacks of ore on their backs. They work almost naked, wearing only breechcloths about their waists, singing weird songs as they dig out the ore. After the ore is taken from the mines, it is broken up into small pieces with hammers by women and children. The best of it is then ground to powder by rolling great stones over it. The powder is mixed with mercury, which dissolves the silver out of the dust, and by other chemical processes it is then made ready for the use of man. Some of the richest silver mines of the world are in the Andes. A little north of Mount Megs, where we cross the coast range in Peru, is the town of Cerro de Pasco, built about one of the richest bodies of silver ore ever known. The most of the silver has been mined, and under it are now found vast deposits of copper. The mine was discovered several hundred years ago in a curious way. An Indian shepherd had wandered to this place one day with his flock. As evening drew on, he found the air very cold and kindled a fire, before which he lay down to sleep. When he awoke the next morning, he discovered that the stone upon which his fire had been built had melted and turned to silver. From under that spot the Peruvians have since taken out thousands of tons of pure silver, and the Americans who now own the mines are producing many million pounds of copper a year. There are other rich silver regions in different parts of Peru, and in the Bolivian highlands there is a strip of country wider than the state of Pennsylvania and as long as the distance from Philadelphia to Omaha, which is dotted with silver mines. Bolivia has perhaps given more silver to the world than any other country. It has a mountain called Potosi, out of which has been taken almost $3 billion worth of silver, so much that, could it have been melted up and made into teaspoons, it would have furnished enough to have given 2 solid silver spoons to every man, woman, and child upon the globe. A mule ride of 3 days from La Paz over the plateau brings us to the town of Oruro, a few miles from Lake Popo. Oruro has over 25,000 people. It lies at the foot of Rocky Mountains, and it is almost surrounded by mines which contain rich veins of silver and tin. Tin mines are not so common in the world as mines of silver and gold, but tin is of such a character that a little of it goes a great way. It is largely used as a coating for sheets of iron to protect them from rust. The tin cups, pans, and pails, and other such things which we use, are made of tin plate, which is merely iron plated with tin. The only mines which gave much tin to the world until within about 200 years were those of southern England. The mines there are still worked, but Great Britain uses so much tin that this is not nearly enough, and she imports a great deal from faraway lands. It is the same with the other countries of Europe, and also with the United States. Just now a great deal of tin comes from the Strait of Malacca, from different parts of Australia, and from the rich mines which we find in Peru and Bolivia. We spend some time in the tin mines of Oruro. They are noted for the fine quality of their ore. It looks to us much like silver. Much of it does contain silver. We learn that both silver and tin are often found mixed together in the same vein. The ore is dug from the rocks with hammers and drills. It is broken to pieces and then ground to powder. It is next put into a furnace with other materials and melted through a process called smelting. After this, when the furnace is opened, all the rock and dirt passes off, and the pure tin flows away in a bright, silver-like stream. It is run into molds, each of which contains 50 pounds. The molds soon cool, forming the bricks of tin which are shipped to all parts of the world. End of Chapter 12. Recording by Andrea Kay.
Chapter 13 of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Julie Barclay. Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America by Frank Carpenter. Chapter 13. On the Nitrate Desert and the Guano Islands. Put on your dark spectacles this morning. You will need them to protect your eyes from the sun, for we are about to travel again over the glaring sands of the desert. The country of Oruro is sterile enough, but the lands through which we must pass on our way down to the sea are among the most barren parts of the world. We take the little narrow-gauge railroad, which was built to bring the tin and silver and other things of Lower Bolivia to the sea, and shoot out into the vast plains, upon which everything looks grey, bare, and forbidding. Now we cross fields of salt which dazzle our eyes under the glare of the sun, and go into regions of volcanic rock upon which nothing green grows. We go by 2 large blue lakes, near the shore of which are what look like great cakes of ice. Our lips are dry and parched, and we long for a drink. The train stops at a station, and we ask the conductor if some of the ice cannot be brought into the car. The conductor replies that the white stuff is not ice at all. He says it is borax, and that the water of the lake is not fit to drink. He brings us a lump of borax from a pile which has just arrived at the station to be sent off to Europe. It looks like the finest spun silk wadded up or woven into a lump, and he tells us that it is used in making beads, glass, and cement, and for glazing pottery ware. It is also of value in preserving meat, fish, and milk, and forms a part of some kinds of medicines. It is good for sore eyes, and is very cleansing as a wash for the hair. The body of water at which we are looking is the great borax lake of Ascotan, out of which thousands of tons of borax are taken each year and shipped to all parts of the world. The borax crystallizes in the water of the lake, and gathers in a crust on the edges, or falls to the bottom. It is produced by certain minerals in the volcanic soil about it, or perhaps by vapor which bursts up through the ground from the volcanic mountains which are found in this part of Bolivia. Is it not odd that such things should come out of the earth? Yes, indeed. But as we go farther down toward the sea, we shall enter a region in Chile which is even more strange. There is a part of the coast desert where for hundreds of miles the sands are underlaid with a great bed of nitrate of soda. Nitrate of soda is a salt used for making nitric acid and also for enriching the soil. We used vast quantities of it in the United States, and more than 1 million tons are shipped from this desert to Europe every year. It is so valuable indeed that cities have grown up on this barren coast, inhabited by the people who dig out the nitrate of soda and prepare it for sale. Such a town is Antofagasta, where we end our railroad journey from the plateau to the sea. It is one of the most thriving little ports on the Pacific coast of South America. Making our way through the nitrate fields to the north, we come to a still larger city, Iquique, the chief nitrate port of the world. What a queer place for a town. Iquique is on the edge of the sea below ragged hills. It is built on the sand. There is not a blade of grass in the country about it. It has not a drop of water from year's end to year's end, except that which is brought to it in ships or in the iron pipe, 75 miles long, which connects it with some springs in a desert oasis. Still, it is a thriving little city. It has stores, schools, newspapers, telephones, electric lights, and streetcars. We can buy anything we want in its markets, including the most delicious fruits and the best of fresh meats. Such things are brought in by ships from other parts of the coast, and from nitrate alone comes the money that pays for them all. The nitrate is found on the east coast of a low range of hills from 15 to 90 miles back from the sea. It is in the form of a rocky stratum with layers of salt rock and sand above it, although sometimes it lies on the top of the ground. It is not known just how it was formed. Some people suppose that the desert was once the bed of an inland sea, and that vast quantities of seaweed containing nitrogen, having been covered with sand, decayed, and under the peculiar conditions of this region became nitrate of soda. In getting out the nitrate rock, a hole about 1 foot wide is bored down through the sand, salt rock, and nitrate to the soft earth underneath. A small boy is now let down into the hole. He scoops a pocket out of the earth just under the stratum of nitrate and fills it with powder, inserting a fuse which extends up over the top. The boy is then pulled out and the fuse lighted. There is a loud explosion. A cloud of yellow smoke and dust goes up into the air, and the earth for a wide distance about is broken to pieces. The nitrate rock is now dug out with picks and crowbars. It must be further treated, however, before it is ready for sale. Pure nitrate of soda is not found in nature, and the rock we see thus blown out of the desert is more than half dirt and sand. It is loaded on carts and carried to the factories which have been built in the fields. The factories have great boiling tanks, heated by steam pipes which run through them. Into these tanks of hot water the lumps of nitrate are thrown. The boiling melts up the rock, and just as salt melts and goes into water, so the nitrate salt is taken up by the water of the tank, while the dirt and sand sink to the bottom. After a time, all of the nitrate of soda has gone out of the rock into the boiling water. It now looks for all the world like pale maple syrup. This fluid is drawn from the boiler and run into cooling tanks. In these, the nitrate soon crystallizes and sinks to the bottom, so that after a time each tank is filled with what looks like white sugar, while the water on top has become almost clear. The deposit is nitrate of soda. The water is now allowed to flow off, and the nitrate is shoveled out into piles to dry in the sun. It is next bagged up in sacks of 300 pounds each and taken on the railroad to the seacoast, to be shipped to the United States and to Europe. There is another thing which comes from the nitrate rock, which is carefully saved. This is iodine, a crystalline substance which is used in photography and for making dyes and many kinds of valuable drugs. It is obtained from the boiled water out of which the nitrate has been taken. Into the water a certain quantity of bisulfite of soda is put. This causes all the iodine in the water to drop to the bottom in a dirty black powder. This powder is washed and heated in tight iron boxes. It soon turns to vapor, and is then conducted from the boxes into pipes of fire clay. As the vapor touches the clay, it cools and changes to crystals of a beautiful violet color. These crystals are the iodine of commerce. They are shipped to Europe and thence sent to all parts of the world. Is it not curious that men should go so far and work so hard merely to get food for the soil? The earth is much like man in that it will not work well, that is, produce good crops for many years in succession, without being fed. The most of the nitrate is used as food for lands which are expected to yield the richest of crops. Good soil foods are so valuable indeed that farmers will pay high prices for them, and vast fortunes have been made out of other such things which are found in this part of South America. Next to nitrate of soda, the chief of these is guano. Guano is a mixture of the manure of birds and of dead seals and fish, which is to be found along certain parts of the seacoast and on a number of islands not far from the shores of Peru and Chile. The islands are volcanic rocks. They are as bare as the desert. They have not a blade of grass nor any green thing upon them, and are merely rock masses covered with what looks much like sand. If you stir this sand up, it will give forth a smell like ammonia, and if you put it upon the soil, it will cause it to produce bountiful crops. If we should stay on the islands overnight, we could see that they are then covered by birds, which have for ages chosen them as their roosting places and homes. They are the pelicans and seagulls which feed by the millions in the waters in this part of the Pacific. They often bring the fish which they have caught in their bills to the islands and leave them there. During some parts of the year, many seals come here to breed, and seals often crawl out of the sea upon these rocks to die. All this has been going on for many years, and the result is a deposit which is so valuable as manure that ships are sent here to take it away to our country and to Europe. There are houses upon some of these islands, put up for the men who dig out the guano, and on one or two of them there are little railroads which have been made to carry the guano down to the shores. End of chapter 13. Recording by Julie Barclay.
Chapter 14 of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Betty B. Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America, by Frank Carpenter. Chapter 14. Along the Coast to Valparaiso. It takes us 5 days by steamer to go from Iquique to Valparaiso, the chief seaport of Chile. The sail along the west coast is delightful. There are few storms, and almost every day we make a new port, at which we see many strange things. Luscious grapes and oranges are brought to the steamer from the valley oases of the desert, and we now and then take on a few barrels of wine. While our steamer stops at Antofagasta, we have time to visit one of the large smelters of South America. It has been built here to smelt the silver out of the ore brought down from the Andes. This work is done in huge furnaces, the ore being melted with other materials in such a way that the pure silver is taken out of the rocks. The ore is first ground to powder, which is then molded into bricks. As we pass through the yard, we see a large plot of ground upon which are piled up enough bricks to build a big house. It is perhaps the richest brickyard on earth. The bricks look like blocks of gray sand, but they are really silver ore, ground fine and molded into this shape that the ore may be more easily smelted. Farther down the coast we anchor at Coquimbo to take on a big load of copper. Hundreds of long bars or bricks of reddish-brown metal are brought out to our steamer on a lighter and put away in the hold. This copper comes from mines not far from the town. We learn that Chile has vast deposits of very rich copper. It lies in great lumps or veins in the mountains, and is mined and smelted and shipped to all parts of the world. There is a mountain of iron near Coquimbo where they are taking out ore to be shipped to the United States to make steel. The ships take the ore through the Panama Canal to the ports on the east coast of our country. Soon after leaving Coquimbo, we pass away from the desert. We sail about 200 miles farther south and finally come to anchor in the Bay of Valparaiso. It is shaped like a half moon, being walled with steep hills covered with luxuriant trees and beautiful flowers. A few miles inland from the coast there are orange and lemon groves, vineyards and trees bearing almost all kinds of fruits, and just over the mountains is the long valley of Chile, one of the richest farming and fruit-raising regions of all South America. At Valparaiso we are not halfway along the coast. Chile extends from here to the Strait of Magellan. It is the narrowest of all countries in proportion to its length. It stretches only from the ocean to the top of the Andes, and its width is nowhere greater than the distance from New York to Boston. In some places, indeed, its width is not greater than the distance from Philadelphia to New York. But it is so long that if laid from east to west upon the United States, with one end at New York, it would stretch out far beyond Great Salt Lake. If you could twist it around so that it would lie north and south, with Tierra del Fuego on the Florida Keys, the nitrate fields which we have just left would be in Hudson Bay, about even with the northern part of Labrador. A land of this kind must have many climates. It was quite hot at Iquique, but the winter air here at Valparaiso is pleasantly cool, and near the Strait of Magellan the ground is often covered with snow. The same difference exists in regard to rain. In the northern desert one never needs an umbrella, but at Valparaiso it rains now and then throughout the year. It rains more as you go farther south, and in some places so much water falls that the people jokingly say it rains 13 months every year. As we reach the rain belt, the desert suddenly stops. Green fields are frequently seen, and as we go still farther south, we shall travel in a valley covered with crops, and come into a country where the grass grows luxuriantly and where there are great forests bound together with vines. But what is the cause of the change? Why is northern Chile so dry, and the greater part of southern Chile wet? It comes from the winds. We have learned that the desert exists because the winds which come from the east have had the water squeezed out of them by the cold air of the mountains before they reach the west slope. The winds which roll over southern Chile come from a different direction. They are blown toward the southeast. As they cross the warm waters of the Pacific, they drink themselves full of moisture, and when they reach the cold part of Chile, the difference in the temperature makes this moisture drop down. Hence we shall find that there are copious rains, producing many streams, which flow down the west slope of the Andes. On the other side of the mountains, in parts of Patagonia, the country is almost a desert, for the winds have been wrung dry before they reach there. Leaving our ship, we explore Valparaiso. The city is about the size of Indianapolis. It is the best business point upon the whole coast, owing its growth to its harbor, which is large enough to float all the ships of the world. We come to anchor among steamers from different parts of Europe. They are loading and discharging goods. Some of them are taking on cattle, wheat, vegetables, and fruits for the cities of the desert farther north, and others have stopped on their way to add to their cargoes of nitrate, copper, and hides which they will carry from Chile to Europe. We take a boat to the shore, wondering how we can get up the hills to the houses above us. Valparaiso rises from the water in the shape of an amphitheater, or like the grandstand of a ball ground. The streets rise in terraces one above the other, so that the buildings at the top seem to hang out above and threaten to fall down upon those below. But see, there are cable cars climbing up and down the steep hills. It is by them we shall mount from one street to another, for the only level land in the city is a narrow stretch along the shore. Upon this level place is the business part of Valparaiso. It is all on made ground. The hills were dug down and the waters kept back by walls of stone and iron rails, in order that the tide might not eat out the land. We step from our boat upon stone wharves, and walk over streets as well paved as our streets at home. It is hard for us to believe we are in a South American city. The buildings are large and much like those of our cities. The stores have plate glass windows. We see German and English names over some of them, and we learn that Valparaiso has many Europeans who have come here to engage in trade. The people do not look much different from those of New York and Chicago. There are electric lights. We hear the boys cry the newspapers, and as we notice the signs of enterprise all about us, we believe what has been told us, that the Chileans are among the most enterprising people of the South American continent. The country contains over 3,000,000 inhabitants. They do not call themselves Chileans, but Chilenos, and they pride themselves on being better and stronger than the people of the countries farther north. They are like them, however, in that they are the descendants of the Spaniards, and of the mixed race of Spaniards and Indians. The difference is that the Spaniards who came to Chile were chiefly from the northern provinces of Spain, where the people are stronger and better than those of the south, and also that the Chilean Indians were the famed Araucanians, a much stronger and braver race than the tribes ruled by the Incas, with whom the Spaniards united in Ecuador and Peru. The Chileans we see on the streets of Valparaiso are dressed just as we are. We hear many of them speak English, and as we look at our familiar surroundings, we wonder whether Chile is after all much different from the United States. But stop! There comes a lady with a black shawl draped about her head, and behind her is a vegetable peddler with his stock in panniers. There is a bread horse with a baker beside it, and a milk mule going down that street. Get out of the way of that automobile that is speeding towards us. Look out for the horse that has just come around the corner. Its rider is a man with a poncho and a broad-brimmed hat. He is probably a rich farmer in from the country. We shall see many of his kind later on. What a queer streetcar that is going by us! It has seats on top as well as inside. See that pretty woman on the rear platform? She is the conductor. She is taking up the fares and making change from the money in her white apron pocket. There are women streetcar conductors in all of the chief cities of Chile. The custom was introduced when Chile was at war with Peru, and the men were all needed for soldiers. But we may as well leave Valparaiso. It has so many foreigners that we must go inland to see how the Chileans live and to learn about their country. There are railroads to the interior, and we decide to make our first journey on the Trans-Andine line. End of chapter 14.
Chapter 15 of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Andrea Kay. Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America, by Frank Carpenter. Chapter 15. Across South America by Rail. We have already seen something of the railroads farther north which go from the Pacific to the top of the Andes. The one upon which we are riding today will soon join the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans together. It is the Trans-Andean Railroad, going over the Andes from Valparaiso to Buenos Aires. Our car is a Pullman, and we can see well as we go. Leaving Valparaiso, the train skirts the edge of the harbor, passing through the rich suburb of Viña del Mar. How soft the air is, and how sweet the smell of the trees and grass after our long stay in the desert. Morning glories are blooming on the fences at the roadside, and that great bush over there is loaded with roses. Now we whiz by an orange grove, almost close enough to grab at the yellow balls peeping out of the leaves. Now we go by vineyards, and now we stop at a station at which pears, figs, and lemons are brought to the car windows for sale. How cheap everything is! We can get a big bunch of grapes or all the oranges we can eat for a dime. Now the road leaves the coast, and we are climbing the hills. There is but little green except in the valleys. They are covered with cultivated fields through which flow irrigating ditches supplied by the streams. See the men at work in the fields. There is one plowing. He has 2 white oxen joined to the plow by a pole. The pole is tied to the yoke, which rests on the necks of the oxen just back of the horns, to which it is fastened with skin ropes. At the next station we see oxen yoked the same way pulling huge carts loaded with grain. Notice the wheels of the carts. They are twice as high as those of our carts, and the loads are so heavy that 8 oxen are yoked in double file to each cart. How the wheels creak and screech on their way past the train! The oxen are pushing their burden along by their heads. The method of yoking them is cruel indeed. An ox cannot move his head unless his fellow ox moves at the same time. The houses of the Chilean towns are very similar to those we saw on the coast of Peru. There are many huts in the fields, made of mud, with roofs of straw, thatch, or sheet iron. After we cross the coast range, the farms are larger and the country is more thickly populated. We ride for some time through the irrigated valley of the Aconcagua River, with the mighty mountains rising above us. We are now climbing the second range of the Andes. As we go on, gradually rising, we pass orchards of apples and peaches, with rich, well-watered gardens lying high up in the mountains. The country grows wilder and wilder, and at last we are at the station where the road ends. We are now very near the frontier of Argentina and within a short distance of the long Argentina Railroad, which crosses the Pampas to Buenos Aires. We have not time now to make the whole journey, for we wish to go around the southern part of the continent by the Strait of Magellan. So we shall ride over the railroad to the top of the mountains, and from there take mules to see something of this part of the Andes, and then return to our travels in Chile. We go over the old wagon road, which crosses the mountains at the Uspallata Pass, about 2.5 miles above the sea, and stop there to see the Christ of the Andes. This is an heroic figure of the Christ upholding the cross, with statues of Chile and Argentina at the foot clasping hands. This road can be easily traveled in summer, but in the winter the snows are so heavy that men are often lost in the storms, and they sometimes spend many days on the way. That is why the little stone huts which we pass now and then have been built. They have no windows. They look more like bake ovens than houses. They are for shelter for the passengers and postmen who are caught in the storms. Men sometimes have to live in them for days, waiting for the snows to melt in the mountains. There are 1 or 2 rude inns on the way where we stop. The hot soup tastes good, for we are cold. The Andes at this point are wild in the extreme. One of the worst parts of the pass is called the Valley of Desolation. Here the land is covered with volcanic rock, upon which nothing can grow. Now and then we see a guanaco, a wild animal which looks somewhat like a llama, except that its fur is yellow spotted with white. We shall see more such farther south. Now a condor soars about over us. There it is between us and the sun, casting a shadow upon the snow. Condors when they are hungry are like vultures. They will eat dead things, and we are wondering whether that mighty bird is not waiting to see us drop in our tracks. How pure the air is, and how thin! We fear we may have another attack of mountain sickness. We are, however, more than a mile lower down at the summit of this pass than at the Galera Tunnel, through which we cross the Andes on the Oroya Railroad back of Lima, and our faintness soon passes off. The highest part of the Trans-Andine Railroad has been difficult to construct. It includes many tunnels. The cars are taken up the steepest part of the mountains by a track like those which go up Pikes Peak and Mount Washington, and the track has 3 rails. In addition to the 2 which one usually sees on a railroad, there is a 3rd narrow rail with many rungs in it like a ladder. Upon this moves a cogwheel attached to the car, and the little engine made for the purpose runs behind the train instead of in front of it. The cars are pushed, not pulled, up the mountains. At about 2 miles above the sea there is a tunnel through the mountains, and there are also many snow sheds cut out of the solid rock through which the trains pass in order that they may not be stopped in the winter. The Trans-Andine Railroad is of great good to travelers. We shall see why as we go by the old route around the south end of the continent to Buenos Aires. The voyage from Valparaiso by the Strait of Magellan takes from 14 to 16 days. By this road, passengers can be carried clear across the continent in 29 hours. It makes the long trip from Europe to the west coast of South America very much shorter, and travelers from Europe to Australia can now come to Buenos Aires in about 20 days, then cross South America by rail, and take ship at Valparaiso, instead of making the long voyage around through the Strait of Magellan as in the past. On our journey over the road we have fine views of Aconcagua, the highest of the Andes. It is one of the fine mountain sights of the world. When the sky is clear, it can be seen from Valparaiso rising in a great cone high above the others of the Chilean Andes, dwarfing all the peaks near it except Mount Tupungato, which is more than 4 miles in height. Aconcagua is more than 23,000 feet high, and as we look at its snowy top, we long to climb it. If we should make the attempt, we should probably meet snowstorms, and we might be frozen during the cold nights. Near the summit there are cliffs which are hard to scale, and at the top we should stand on a square plateau about 200 feet wide, with great masses of fleecy clouds far below us, and the mountains stretching away to the east and to the south. On one side we could see the pampas of Argentina, and on the other, over the narrow band of green which is the country of Chile, 90 miles away, would be the shining, silvery waters of the Pacific. This journey, however, can be made only in the summer, and our guides will not allow us to make the attempt. We must be satisfied with the magnificent views we have had as we rode through the pass. So we remount our mules and slowly climb back down the hills to the railroad. Here we take the train for Los Andes, where we change cars to the line which goes down the Central Valley of Chile and brings us at last to Santiago. End of Chapter 15. Recording by Andrea Kay.
Chapter 16 of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michael Facio. Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America, by Frank Carpenter. Chapter 16. Santiago, the capital of Chile. Santiago is the capital of Chile. It is about as large as our national capital, and in many things like it. Washington is 6 hours distant from our chief seaport, New York. Santiago is about 6 hours by rail from Valparaiso, the chief seaport of Chile. Washington lies in a basin on the banks of the Potomac. Santiago is cut in two by the river Mapocho, and the basin upon which it is built is walled by the snowy Andes and by low mountains which rise one above another from grassy plains. We have our Capitol Hill. Santiago has its Santa Lucia, a mass of volcanic rocks rising almost precipitously in the midst of the city to a height more than half that of the Washington Monument. Santa Lucia is perhaps the most picturesque hill of any city in the world. It has a base of a little more than an acre. It is composed of rocks enormous in size and piled together in curious shapes. There is earth mixed with the rocks, so that the trees grow among them. Flowers and vines have been planted, and the hill has been made into a beautiful park. Its sides are covered with English ivy. Tall eucalyptus trees rise out of the crevices of the rocks from its base to its summit. It has wonderful ferrous, dark caves, and beautiful grottos in which there are waterfalls, making altogether what might be called a hanging garden away up there above the city, under the shadow of the Andes. There are winding driveways and footpaths which go round and round the hill to the summit. We walk up one of the paths to take a look over Santiago. It is early morning, and the sun is just rising up in the great blue dome of the sky. It has caught the tops of the Andes at the back of the city, and the snows upon them are shining like frosted silver encrusted with diamonds. The foothills in the shadow are like blue velvet, and we look at the plains away off in the distance, with a rich growth of green. Our eyes now drop to the city below us. Red-tiled roofs with trees and bushes growing out of them extend about on all sides. Those are the roofs of the Chilean capital. The scene is not unlike that which we saw from the top of our hotel in Lima. The houses are built in the same style. They are close to the streets, and consist of rooms built around small courts or patios, in which are the gardens. Some of the Santiago houses are of a vast size, although all are low, few being of more than 2 stories. See that wide avenue which cuts the city almost in halves? That is the Alameda, the chief street of this South American capital. It is twice as wide as Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington. There are rows of tall poplar trees running through it from one end to the other, and along each side of the trees are stone aqueducts in which streams of mountain water are flowing. With our field glasses we see the statues of many Chilean heroes under the trees, and at every few feet stone seats upon which men and women are sitting, enjoying the air. Boys are riding on bicycles along the paths in the center of the street, and at every few hundred feet there are 2 or 3 cows with their calves beside them. Each of the calves wears a muzzle. The cows are owned by women, who milk them from time to time and sell the milk warm from the cow to the people who are out taking the air. The cows are not tied, but are hobbled by ropes about their hind legs. Now turn your eyes a little more to the right. There is another wide strip of green, with a band of silver running through it. That is the river Mapocho, which flows through the city. A little more to the left is the race course, which is thronged by thousands on Sunday afternoons, when the chief races are held. The forest above it is Cuseno Park, where the people drive in their carriages every afternoon. But let us go down from the hill and take a streetcar ride through the city. The seats on the roof of the car are the best for sightseeing, and to ride there costs only 1 cent of our money per trip. Think of a streetcar ride for 1 cent, and that ride through Santiago. We give our fare to the woman conductor, and are soon whizzing along, as high up as the roofs of the 1-story houses, through the suburbs and the poorer parts of the town. Now we pass between the higher buildings of the business section. What fine stores they are! They are as good as our stores at home. The show windows have all sorts of beautiful goods, and there are several great arcades roofed with glass, which have been cut through the business blocks from one side to the other. We go by the Moneda, or the Mint. It is a great building which contains also the home of the President and most of the offices of the Chilean government. At the door there are soldiers with drawn swords in their hands. Later on we see that the President of Chile has a military guard of 200 cavalry which goes with his carriage on all state occasions. The Chileans are fond of pomp and display. We meet policemen with swords at their sides on every street corner, and we shall see soldiers drilling in every city and town. Chile is a republic after the South American fashion, in which the chief families control the elections and hold most of the offices. In that building we are now passing, the houses of Congress meet, and those men who are going in are senators and deputies who sit there and make laws just as in our Congress at home. But here we are at the Plaza des Armes, where all the cars stop. This is the center of the Chilean capital. That big building over there is the cathedral, and the great structure next door is the palace where the archbishop lives. The Roman Catholic religion is the chief religion of Chile, and the church has a great deal of property. Some of the best business blocks of Santiago belong to it, and it has vast estates in the country, upon which fruit and wheat and other such things are raised for sale. Those ladies dressed all in black, with black shawls on their heads, are going to Mass. See the little rugs which they have with them. They kneel upon them when they pray, for many of the churches have no seats, and the stone floors are cold. Later on we visit the schools. They are much like our schools at home, save that the girls and the boys are kept in different buildings, and that the children of the lower grades all study out loud. Chile has now a good public school system. There are schools in every city and village, although 4 children out of every 5 are still kept at home. We find Santiago has a national university with 1,000 students, and that there are also schools for the army and navy. Indeed, we are surprised at the intelligence of the Chileans. They have been called the Yankees of South America, because they are so bright and enterprising and in other ways like us. Many people of the better classes speak French and English, some having been educated in Europe. In all the cities there are daily newspapers. We meet newsboys on almost every street corner, and visit large bookstores in the business parts of the city. At the post office we learn that millions of letters and newspapers go through the mails every year, and when we inquire we find that there are telegraph lines to all parts of the country, and that the prices for telegrams are much lower than we pay at home. There are electric lights and electric railroads in the principal Chilean cities. Telephones are to be found in all the large towns, and you can talk from Santiago to your friends in Valparaiso over the telephone, although it is a distant 6 hours by rail. During our stay at the capital we are invited to visit the homes of some well-to-do Chileans. We are surprised at the size of their houses. They are of 1 or 2 stories, but many of them have 40 large rooms, which are furnished as expensively as the houses of our millionaires. In many homes we see fine paintings and statues, and in the suburbs we visit mansions with gardens about them, in which are lemon and orange trees and all kinds of beautiful flowers. But how about the poor? All of the Chileans cannot be rich. No, indeed, they are not. There are poor people everywhere. We see them driving carts and carrying goods on their backs through the streets. We shall find them living in mud huts in all parts of the country, and if we will again mount to the top of the streetcar we may ride through sections of Santiago which are filled with low one-story houses in which whole families live in one room. Many of the poor people sleep on the floor, and their food costs but a few cents a day. They are mostly of the mixed race of Spanish and Indians. They do the hard work of Chile, and we shall see much of them in our trips through the country. End of chapter 16.
Chapter 17 of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America, by Frank Carpenter. Chapter 17, A Visit to a Chilean Farm. Today, we start down the great central valley of Chile.
This valley lies between the main range of the Andes and the mountains which border the coast. It is in places over 100 miles wide and as long as the distance from New York to Pittsburgh. It is divided into vast estates, upon which all sorts of fruits and grains are grown, and where cattle and horses are grazed in droves of thousands. There are few countries in the world where farms are so large as in Chile, or their owners so rich. We meet men who each own thousands of acres, and see many estates which are worth more than $1 million. The wealthier farmers live like lords upon their estates or haciendas. Farming is profitable in Chile. The country produces every year millions of bushels of wheat and barley, millions of gallons of wine, and the best horses and cattle on the west coast of South America. More than half of the people of Chile are engaged in farming, but only a few families own land. Most of the farms are in this great central valley. They are irrigated by the streams from the mountains, and are in most places cultivated like gardens. The fields are divided by canals, along which trees have been planted. Some of the estates have stone walls about them, and now and then we see a fence of wire or boards. We look in vain for barns and haystacks and farmhouses like our own. The only buildings are the vast one-story structures of the owners and the mud huts of the workmen. Oxen everywhere take the place of horses and mules. Huge carts drawn by oxen with yokes tied to their horns are used instead of farm wagons, and the plows are dragged through the furrows by the same clumsy beasts. Some of the more enterprising Chileans, however, have been introducing modern machinery lately, and some of the rich farmers now have American plows, threshers, and reapers. We visit one of the farms where we are the guests of the proprietor. He has given us rooms in his country home, which he occupies only in the summer time, when he lives on his country estate. What a lot of rooms there are! There must be 100 all told, and all on the ground floor. The buildings are of one story, with roofs of red tiles, mud walls, and brick floors. They surround little green courts and gardens. Groves of trees, some of which are 100 feet high, are growing about them. There are many other guests at the time of our visit. There are about 30 children among them, and when we go out to ride there are horses for all, some of the little ones being tied to the saddles of their ponies to keep them from falling, for the children here learn to ride when quite young. Every child of a rich farmer has its own pony, and we see boys and girls between the ages of 4 and 14 galloping over the fields, holding their seats like men and women. The farm is so large that we might ride all day on the roads which go through the fields and not visit the whole. The fields are divided by fences of stone, and also by canals, along which have been planted Lombardy poplars, which so shade the road that we do not feel the warm sun. We are delighted with the horses. The peons chase them on the gallop over the fields to show us how well they can run. They are fine riding animals. They are trained to a gait much like a pace, but so easy that we remain in our saddles for hours without fatigue. The horses are directed by pressing the reins against the sides of the neck, and not by pulling at the bit, and the lines are usually left loose. As a result, the horses are seldom hard in the mouth. The saddles are much heavier than ours. Many of them are plated with silver, and ladies and gentlemen frequently use silver stirrups. A Chilean often cares more to have his horse well dressed than to be well dressed himself. His bridle bit is of silver, and his spurs are often of the same metal. The spurs used by the peons have rowels or spiked wheels, as big around as a coffee cup. Some have wheels 4 inches in diameter, so that they cause great pain if the owner is cruel. Later on, we go to the cattle. There are great herds of fine stock and flocks of fat sheep. The crops in the field are growing luxuriantly, and the vineyards and orange orchards are loaded with fruits. We ask how such a place is managed, and are told that it has a major domo, or chief, who has overseers under him, and who organizes his laborers much like an army. Each overseer has so many men to take charge of, and he tells each man what to do. Books are kept showing just how much money is paid out, and what is done every day, so that the proprietor knows how well each field is paying. Indeed, the only poor things on the farm are the inquilinos, or farm workmen. They are the laboring class of the country. They are somewhat like the Indians we saw in Peru and Bolivia. They come of the mixed race of Spaniards and Indians, inheriting the bravery of the both. Peruvian and Bolivian Indians are afraid of their masters, but the Chileans are not. They carry knives, and the master who should strike one of them would probably be stabbed in return. It is said, however, that the men love their masters; they do not often leave the estates upon which they were born. Let us enter one of their huts. What a contrast to the luxurious city home of the owner! The walls are of mud bricks, and the roof is of thatch. The ground forms the floor, and in this case the bed of the family. 2 boxes and a table are the only furniture. The hut has but one room, about 15 feet square, and we are told that a family of 8 lives in it. We wonder how people can exist in such quarters, and when we learn what they eat we wonder more. Their first meal usually consists of a double handful of toasted wheat flour mixed with water into a mush or baked as a cake. At noon they have a bowl of hot beans, and for supper, or dinner as they call it, a second bowl of beans, to which is added some toasted meal. They seldom eat meat, preferring to spend their money for drink. As a result of this mode of living, many of the poor children die. Only the strongest survive, but those who grow up are so strong that 4 men can easily lift a piano on their heads and trot away with it. The men are very polite. When not drunk, they are kind to their families. They are always ready to help one another in trouble. It is difficult to teach them habits of thrift, but it is hoped that through the common schools, which have recently been introduced into all parts of Chile, they will become educated, and in time a much better race. End of chapter 17.
Chapter 18 of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michael Fazio. Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America, by Frank Carpenter. Chapter 18. Southern Chile and the Araucanians. We have left our friends in the country and are again on the train. We travel several hundred miles southward through the great Central Valley. The snowy Andes are still on our left, with smoke rising here and there from a volcanic peak. We cross little rivers and travel through the vast wheat fields cut up by ditches in which the clear water flows. What a lot of vineyards there are! The hills are covered with low grapevines, now brown and leafless, for it is winter. See that drove of cattle at the side of the road, with the men on horseback driving the animals this way and that. They are rounding up or counting the stock and branding the young with red-hot irons. There are 1,000 horses in the next field, and we shall pass other cattle and horses between the stations on our way farther south. What queer trees border the fields! They are lofty poplars planted along the irrigation ditches, all leaning north, blown so by the winds, which usually come from the south. They look like hedges and form lines of green 100 feet high running between the great fields. What is this broad stream we are crossing? It is the Biobio, the largest river of Chile. It rises in the Andes not far from the Argentina boundary and flows across the country, emptying into the Bay of Concepcion. How wide it is! The steel bridge over which we cross is one of the finest in South America. It seems to us more than a mile long. There are woods on the banks of the Biobio, and from now on we shall frequently be in the forests. There are no more irrigating ditches, for the rains furnish plenty of water. See the big trees on both sides of the railroad. We have at last come into the forest region of Chile, which extends from here to the Strait of Magellan. The wheat fields we are now passing have been cut out of the woods. How large they are! They look like our fields in the new lands of the Northwest. There are stumps in them. The houses of the poor are log cabins. We see men at work cutting down the trees. Those long teams of oxen are dragging out lumber, their big soft eyes looking sadly at us as they painfully pull the heavy loads along by their heads. Notice the people at the station. How different they seem from the people we saw in the north. They are dark-faced and fierce-looking. They are more warmly clad. The men wear ponchos, and many have on high boots covered with mud. Listen to that group at the corner. The men are talking German, and they do not look like Chileans. They are German settlers who have come here from Europe to farm the land, which the Chilean government sells to immigrants at a very low price. We shall see more Germans at the towns of this part of Chile. At Valdivia there are large tanneries, in which German workmen make fine leather for shipments to Hamburg and Russia. The trees about us have good bark for tanning, and Chile has so many cattle that hides are cheap. But who are the copper-colored people we meet everywhere? They wear gorgeous ponchos woven in stripes of bright colors. The women have bare arms. Their dresses seem to be long blankets wrapped tightly over their chests and falling down to their feet. Some have square earrings of silver, half as big as a schoolbook and as thick as one of its covers. Others have silver plates on their bosoms, and bands of silver beads about their necks and their ankles. They look like Indians, but they are not dressed like our Indians at home. They are Indians. They are the descendants of the famed Araucanians, who inhabited Chile at the time the Spaniards first came. They were noted for their bravery, and it is said that more Spanish lives were lost in attempts to conquer them than in all the wars for the conquests of Mexico and Peru. Their struggle with the Spaniards lasted more than a century, and ended by leaving to the Araucanians a great part of southern Chile. Since then, some of this has been taken away year after year, and now the lands of the Araucanians are few. Alcohol furnished by the whites has made them a nation of drunkards, and their bad habits are fast killing them off. They are now less in number than when they first fought the Spaniards, and they grow fewer and fewer each year. The Araucanians have different tribes, commanded by chiefs, although many of them live on farms of their own. We leave our train and visit one of their homes. The house is more like a shed than anything else. It contains but one room about 20 feet square, and it has no wall at all at the front, the open side being faced away from the wind. Skins are drawn over this side when the weather is cold. Take a look at the roof. It is made of skins and straw thatch. The walls are of logs, and the floor is of dirt. Let us go in. How black everything is! You can hardly see about you for the dense smoke which comes from that fire in the middle of the hut. It is built in a hole in the ground, and the smoke finds its way out as it can. The squaw who bends over the fire is cooking the dinner. She has a pot on the coals, in which she is stewing mutton and vegetables cut up in small pieces. Now the meal is ready, and our host asks us to sit down and eat with him. We squat on the floor, and each takes a spoon and dips the stew out of the pot. The women of the family do not dine with us. The men always eat first, the Indian women standing behind them like servants and taking what is left. How hot the stew is! It is full of red pepper, and it brings the tears to our eyes. But who is that woman who has come in during the meal and started another fire farther back in the hut? That is our host's other wife. An Araucanian often has more than one wife, and in such cases each wife cooks for herself. There are 2 beds on the different sides of the room, curtained off with fur rugs or blankets. Each bed belongs to a wife, in which she sleeps with her own children about her. The Araucanians have queer notions of courtship. Marriage with them is largely a matter of bargain and sale. A father expects a lot of presents of cattle, sheep, or horses for his daughter, and until these are promised he will not consent to the marriage. After all is settled, the young man comes some dark night to the house of his sweetheart and carries her off. The girl usually knows he is coming, and though she may want to be married, she pretends she does not. She has her friends with her, and when her lover and his friends break in, there is a fight between the men and the women. The men try to carry off the girl, and the girl and her friends use all their powers of resistance. At last the groom drags the bride out. He swings her upon his horse, and, jumping behind her, goes off on the gallop, making for the nearest woods. The girl's friends follow shrieking behind, but the groom, of course, soon distances them. Having reached the forest, he takes his lady love into his recesses, and there they spend a few days. After this short honeymoon they return to the house of the groom, and are then looked upon as married. The husband now takes his presents to the father of his wife, and the young couple settle down. The women we meet seem to be happy. They are kind to their children and are fond of them. The children laugh and play just as our children do, and we laugh ourselves when we see the little papooses smiling at us out of the bundles in which they are tied. Almost as soon as one of these Indian babies is born, it is wrapped in a skin or cloth and tied to a framework about a yard high and so wide that it will easily rest on the back of its mother. The mother carries it on her back by a strap which runs around her head, and when she is tired she takes off the strap and stands the papoose against a tree or the wall of her hut. She keeps it thus tied up until it is able to walk, carrying it with her wherever she goes. Some of the Indian women are skilled in weaving. They spin their own wool and weave their own clothes. They make beautiful blankets, weaving them in stripes of red, black, and blue. We spend a day moving about over their farms, and notice that the men at work in the fields are often of the mixed race. The Indians employ them to work for them, rather than labor themselves. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of Carpenter's Geographic Reader, South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michael Facio. Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America, by Frank Carpenter. Chapter 19. In the Coal Mines of Chile. We have left the land of the Araucanians and are now in the city of Concepcion. It is the chief port of southern Chile. It lies a few miles back from Arauco Bay, where we expect to get a ship for the Strait of Magellan. Concepcion is the greatest commercial city of southern Chile, and its people say it will soon be the chief seaport of the southern Pacific. It has two excellent harbors, Arauco Bay and Talcahuano, which are nearby, and it is so connected by railroads with all parts of the country that it has a great trade. The city has about 50,000 people. It is a flat Spanish town with its plaza in the center, and streets which cross one another at right angles. This part of Chile is especially important because it contains some of the chief coal fields of the Pacific coast of South America. There is but little coal on the coast, and coal is brought here by the shipload from Australia and England. The coal fields of Chile lie along the ocean shore for a distance of almost 100 miles. The coal is not so good as that which is brought from abroad, and it must be sold at a lower price. The mines are so close to the sea, however, that they can be worked at a profit. It is for coal that the steamer for the Strait of Magellan has stopped in Arauco Bay. She now lies at anchor near Lota, with great barges of coal by her side. We see sooty-faced workmen standing in the barges and shoveling the coal on board. The ship is bound for Hamburg. She must force her way through the ocean, a distance of about 5,000 miles, before she can get coal again. It takes a vast deal of fuel to make a steam for such a big ship. This vessel uses more in one day than many families can consume in a year, and it will keep the men shoveling until night to load up. As we go on board, the captain tells us we have time to visit one of the mines. We are tired, and at first think it hardly worthwhile, until the captain says that the coal beds of this region slope from the land down under the ocean, and that the coal which they are now shoveling on board comes from under the sea. This seems very strange, so we call a small boat which is near the ship, waiting for passengers, to take us on shore. We are soon landed at the entrance of one of the greatest of the coal mines. The works above ground consist of large buildings, situated upon little islands connected with the coast by a railroad built upon piers. We kindly tell the manager that we wish to visit his mine, and he kindly sends a guide with us. We are taken to a great shaft or well, in which, by a steam engine and pulleys, two elevators are raising cars filled with coal and lowering empty cars to the bottom. We step upon the elevator that is just going down, and drop into darkness. Down, down, down we go, until at last rays of light shoot up from below us. Our speed grows slower, and we stop before a long tunnel with a line of electric lights extending on in front of us, growing less and less in size until they fade into stars in the distance. As we step out of the shaft, a train of loaded cars comes thundering towards us, and we see that they are moved by an overhead trolley, like the electric streetcars of some of our cities. But there is another train going back. Can we get on? Yes. A special car with seats upon it has been attached to the train for us. We climb upon the platform and speed away over the track at the rate of 20 miles an hour. Within a few moments we leave the shore and are soon far out under the bed of the Pacific Ocean. We are moving along through a tunnel which has been cut out of the great sheet of coal which lies down here between the layers of rock. As we go on we pass openings to the right and to the left. They are the entrances to tunnels which have been made to cut out the coal. Think where we are. We are hundreds of feet down under the ocean, and big steamers are floating above us. And still it is dry. There is not a drop on our clothes or our hats, for the great beds of rock just over the cars are such that the water cannot get through. As we ride on, now and then a train passes. In the tunnels at the sides we see half-naked miners covered with dirt, digging out the coal and loading it upon cars. What is that boom, 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 which sounds as though the sea were breaking in through the rocks away at the right? That is from the blasting done to get out the coal. There is no danger where we are now, but we must look out, for if such explosion occurred near us, it might blow us to pieces. What a great mine this is! There are hundreds of men at work in it, and vast quantities of coal are taken out every day. We return to the shaft on a train with 27 cars of coal in front of us, and another train arrives while we are waiting to ride to the top. Again we are back on the steamer. It is almost ready to sail. It has loaded 900 tons of coal in the last 24 hours. Its freight has been packed away during its calls at the various ports farther north, and within a few moments it will start on its long voyage to Europe around through the Strait of Magellan. It is a big ship, and it carries a vast deal of freight. Below deck are 3,000 tons of nitrate of soda, 2,000 barrels of liquid honey, and great rolls of sole leather, all going to Europe. We have wheat, wine, and flour for Punta Arenas on the Strait of Magellan, and similar freight for Buenos Aires and Montevideo. Everything is carefully packed, for we are now going into some of the stormiest seas of the world. The extreme southern end of the continent may be called the very home of the winds. About Cape Horn fierce winds blow all the year through. There are many storms farther north, and seamen are glad when they reach the Strait of Magellan, in which the waters are usually quiet. It is by the Strait of Magellan that we shall go, and on our steamer we will avoid some of the storms by traveling through the narrow channels which run in and out among the mountainous islands along the west coast. This is the Smith's Channel route, the scenery of which is wonderfully grand. We are anxious to be off, and are glad when, as evening falls, there is a rattling of chains, and the anchor is raised. We hear the thump, thump, thump of the engines, and as we go to bed, we are moving out of the smooth waters of Arauco Bay into the ocean. We awake to find the ship rolling. We have to hold to our berths while we dress, and a lurch of the vessel often sends us against the walls of our rooms. We climb upstairs to the deck, and bracing ourselves against the rail look out over the sea. There are whitecaps everywhere. The waves rise and fall in huge masses. They whip the ship, striking its sides with a noise like a cannon. Now a great wave dashes over the lower deck, and now a still higher one splashes over the top, flooding everything and making us run to our cabins. When we sit down at dinner, there is a network of slats upon the table to hold the plates, cups, and other dishes, that a lurch of the ship may not send them into our laps. We lift our soup plates halfway to our mouths, and balance them with the roll of the vessel, trying at the same time to get our spoons between our lips without spilling the soup. How few of the girls have come down to dinner. They are more subject to seasickness than the boys, and prefer to stay in bed in their cabins. Some of the boys are seasick too, and even the bravest of us does not care quite so much for his food as he did upon land. A day or so later we have grown used to the motion and are all upon deck. We enjoy the changes which the rough sea and the storms bring every hour. Now we are shrouded in mist, and every few minutes the foghorn blows to warn other ships to keep out of our way. Now the fog lifts, and we see high waves rolling about on all sides. There is a break in the clouds, and away off to the east is a faint line of blue. That is the long, narrow island of Chiloa. The mainland is much farther off. We are fortunate in securing a view, for in the winter in Chiloa, the natives say it rains 6 days every week, and on the 7th day the sky is much overcast. In the summer there are a few pleasant days, but even then the island is half shrouded in mist. There is more fog and snow as we sail on southward. The sea is still rough, and we cannot safely walk about the deck until we enter the Gulf of Peñas, from which we are to sail inward on our way through Smith's Channel. It is only 4 o'clock when we enter the Gulf, but it is already quite dark. We are now so far south that in winter night begins very early, and the electric lights are already turned on. The ship moves very gently, and when we go to sleep we feel no more motion than when in our own beds at home. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michael Fazio. Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America, by Frank Carpenter. Chapter 20. In and about the Strait of Magellan. We have been moving slowly all night, and awake to find the waves gone. We have left the open Pacific and are passing through the series of channels, about 400 miles long, which winds in and out among the islands of western Patagonia and will bring us at last to the Strait of Magellan. The scenes about us are among the grandest of the world. There are mountains on all sides. We are sailing amongst their tops and are in a land of clouds. The channel is more like a narrow river than a branch of the ocean. It carries us in and out among rocky, grass-clad islands. On our left, ragged mountains of curious shapes rise almost straight up from the water. Their sides near the shore are green, and we see they are matted with moss and evergreen trees. Higher up, the green is dusted with snow, and at the top there is ice. Some of the peaks are half hidden in vapor. Others, nearer our vessel, stand out bold and clear, great masses of dark green velvet under a lavender sky. As we sail on, the scenery changes. The mountains assume curious shapes, and we imagine pictures in them such as you sometimes see in the clouds. There is one that looks like the Great Pyramid of Egypt, and there is another which has a striking resemblance to the Sphinx. Now the green hills in front of us appear to be climbing over one another like a troop of giants playing leapfrog. And there farther on they rise upward in cathedrals and forts of green 1,000 feet high. Now the sun comes out. It has penetrated that deep gorge in the mountains and turned the black water to silver. It catches the snow which is dusted over the green on the hills, and they are spangled with diamonds. It has caught the ice of that glacier and made it an immense lump of sapphire ice set in silvery snow. Now the clouds are settling down upon the channel and hiding the sun. See, there is a wall of them in front of it. We are sailing into a snowstorm. A half hour later we shall sail out into the sun again. How the sky changes! Now it is blue overhead, with fleecy white clouds scattered here and there through it. See those cloud masses nestling in the velvety laps of the hills and wrapping themselves about the snowy peaks as though to warm them. Now the clouds seem to rise from the water, making a wall across the channel as high as our ship. Now they come down from the top, and we sail out of the dry air into a mist so thick that we can almost wash our hands in it as we go through. Again we are out of the clouds. The air is clear. The sun is bathing the hills with its rays. The ferns, moss, and trees shine out in their green luxuriance, and the many cascades, some as big as your wrist and others no larger than your little finger, which fall down them, are threads and cords and ropes of silver. These waterfalls come from the glaciers and the mountain snows. Is it not strange that moss and green trees can grow so luxuriantly amid such surroundings? Yes, but it is only on the highest peaks that it is all snow and ice. Those trees are evergreens, and they are so close together that if we should land we might walk on the tops with snowshoes. A bed of moss, waist deep, grows among them, and great ferns with leaves as long as your arms extend out and cover every bare rocky spot. The glaciers, which are found on the higher mountains, extend down into the green, and now and then icebergs break off and fill up the channels. During some years this voyage is not possible, and, as it is, we make our way a part of the journey through fields of glacial ice. It is not like the ice of our rivers and lakes. It is as clear as crystal, and green rather than white. There is a little iceberg now in front of the ship. It is not bigger than a city lot, and it does not extend out of the water so high as the deck. It is beautifully green, and as the sun catches it, it looks like a great emerald rock with a top of frosted silver. But the machinery is stopping. What is the matter? The captain tells us he is going to get some ice from that berg for the ship. The sailors are already bending over the rails. One of them has a long rope in his hands, with a running noose at its end. Now he gives it a throw. The coil flies out, and the noose catches on a projection of one corner of the iceberg. We have heard of lassoing cattle, but we have never heard of lassoing an iceberg before. Is it not strange? Yes, but not such a bad way after all. The other end of the rope is fastened to a wheel on deck, moved by our steam engine, and as the wheel turns the rope is rolled up and the iceberg dragged close to the ship. Now the steward and some of the sailors have taken one of the ship's boats and landed upon it. They are breaking off great clumps of ice with crowbars. They wrap chains about the ice blocks, and by means of a derrick the machinery of the steamer raises the blocks to the deck. Some of the blocks weigh many tons, and altogether we have got enough ice to last us for the rest of the voyage. But what are those queer-looking boats which are making out from the shore? They look like canoes, and each has a fire in its center, about which huddle brown-skinned, frowsy-headed men, women, and children, almost naked. That man who is paddling the front boat wears little more than a vest, and that boat behind contains several children who have on no clothes at all. These people are some of the savages who live in these waters along the coast of western Patagonia. They are called Alacalufas. They are not like the Indians we have in America. They usually live in their canoes, although they sometimes sleep upon land in little wigwams about as high as your waist. They make the wigwams by bending over the branches of small trees and tying them together. They then build a fire in front and crawl into their little houses for the night. They seldom sleep in the same place for more than a week at a time, for it is much easier to build a new house than to go back home if they have wandered very far off. The men have bows and arrows to defend themselves. The women, as a rule, do the fishing, using lines without hooks. A little chunk of meat is tied to the end of the line, and when the fish has swallowed it, the woman jerks it into her canoe. Their food consists of fish, mussels, and now and then a fox, a seal, or an otter. They are fond of whale meat, and if they can find a dead whale they will feast upon it for weeks. They do not seem to care to have the meat fresh, for they cut it in pieces and bury it, digging it up for food as long as it lasts. They are fond of tobacco and biscuits, and row about our ship, holding out their hands and calling out in shrill voices, "Galeta! Galeta! Tobacco! Tobacco!" the two Spanish words for cake and tobacco. As we look, we wonder that they do not take cold. The hills on the shore are covered with snow, and we have on our heaviest clothing. There is not enough cloth in the whole crowd below us to make a full suit for a 4-year-old child. We pity the poor naked savages, and one of us goes to his cabin and gets out a pair of old trousers. He throws them down into one of the boats. See, that woman has grabbed them. She evidently does not know what they are for, as she is tying them around her neck, fastening the legs over the chest. Until white people came here, these savages used no clothes at all. A thick coat of whale oil or seal oil was enough to keep out the cold. Now they sometimes wear such cast-off things as they can get from the steamers, but as a rule they go naked. The Alacalufas do not know the use of money. We try to buy some skins of them, and they sneer and draw back at the sight of our silver dollars and banknotes. They act differently when we show them some bright cloths and beads, and when the steward holds up a butcher knife, one of the savages is glad to give him 2 skins in exchange. We ask them to come on board, but they are afraid and draw back. They are not friendly to strangers, and would kill a white man if they could catch one alone. We see more savages on our way further south. We cast anchor night after night, for it is too dangerous to travel by dark. The scenery grows grander and grander, until at last we steam through a narrow channel, the mouth of which seems to be blocked by a great island. As we come nearer, we see that there is a wide waterway beyond, and the captain tells us the island is called Desolation Island, and that we are at last in the Strait of Magellan. Standing upon the deck as our ship turns to the east, we look back, and away off in the distance see massive rocks. They belong to Cape Pilar, at the entrance to the strait from the Pacific. In front of us the strait extends for a distance of more than 300 miles, winding its way in and out between the mainland of Patagonia and the islands of the archipelago of Tierra del Fuego, until it opens out into the Atlantic. Its scenery, however, is not so grand as that of Smith's Channel. In passing through the strait we are at times within a stone's throw of the shore. We sail under great mountains, and often in the distance see the high peaks of Tierra del Fuego and of others of the islands of the archipelago. At the eastern end the channel is wider. The land is low, and the waters almost bound the horizon. The Strait of Magellan is one of the commercial highways of the world. It was discovered in 1520 by a Spanish navigator, Ferdinand Magellan, and it has been explored by other navigators from time to time. For many years, however, the regions about it were little known, and for a time some supposed that Tierra del Fuego belonged to another continent which extended farther to the south. The strait is about 350 miles long, and it varies in width from 2 to 24 miles. It has deep waters all the way through, but it winds about so that large sailing vessels, on account of the winds, prefer to go about stormy Cape Horn, although this takes them many hundred miles out of the way. It is different with steamers. They can move about as well in the calms as when the wind blows. Many steamers crossing the Atlantic between Australia and Europe, and some going to and from the east and west coasts of lower South America, pass through the strait. There are indeed so many ships that a city has grown up there on the tail end of the continent to furnish them coal and other supplies. This city is about midway through the strait. It is called Punta Arenas, or Sandy Point, and here we shall stay for a time. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michael Facio. Carpenter's Geographical Reader, South America, by Frank Carpenter. Chapter 21. At the End of the Continent. Punta Arenas is the southernmost city of the world. It is so far along on the other side of the globe that people who live near our Canadian border would have to travel a distance as great as the diameter of the earth to get to it. It is at the very end of the continent, 1,000 miles nearer the South Pole than Cape Town, and several thousand miles farther south than any city of Europe or Asia. It is a lonesome city. There is no town of any size within 1,000 miles of it, and its supplies are brought to it by steamers. Great stores of coal and other goods are kept in Punta Arenas, for the ships passing through the strait often stop here to lay in a new stock of coal and other things for the long voyages which they have yet to make. We find English and German ships in the harbor, and there is a great steamer from New Zealand at anchor, with lighters beside her, and men loading and unloading freight. We step out of our boat upon a pier, and by a short walk are in the heart of the city. What a queer place it is. It consists of scattered buildings built on the sides of the hills surrounding the harbor. It has been cut out of the forest, and it reminds us of the frontier towns of our wooded Northwest. See the stumps in that vacant lot over there, and look at those trees on the hills at the back. Keep to the sidewalks. The streets of some parts of the town are a mass of black mud, with here and there a puddle of water. Those in the center are paved, and the plaza is surrounded by good houses and stores. The town is lighted by electricity. It has telephones and a wireless telegraph station. What queer-looking houses! Few of them are of more than one story, and all have iron roofs. Many of the walls are made of sheets of galvanized iron, others are of logs or boards. It is only in the business parts of the city that there is stone or brick. None of the smaller buildings have chimneys. Those stovepipes sticking out of the windows, with elbows upturned, take their places. What is that long, low structure of galvanized iron whose walls are wrinkled up like a washboard? There are soldiers in front, with swords at their sides. That is the police station. Those soldiers are under the governor of the territory of the Michaelides, who lives in a big house on the other side of the square. He is appointed by the President of Chile, and has charge of this city, of the greater part of Tierra del Fuego, and of the thousands of islands of these faraway seas. But what kind of people live away off here at this tail end of creation? We can learn from the men we see standing in knots on the corners of the streets or passing us as we go through the city. The most of them have their trousers tucked into their boots. They are roughly dressed. Many have long beards, and there are some we would not like to meet after dark. They come from all parts of the world. They are talking together in German, Spanish, Italian, and Russian, and we often hear them speaking English and French. Here come two who are chatting in English. We hear the words sheep and sheep farming. This is one of the cheap sheep-raising parts of South America, and the men in high boots are shepherds who have come to Punta Arenas to purchase supplies. Some live far north in Patagonia, and others have come from the sheep farms in Tierra del Fuego across the strait. As we go through the business part of the city, we see that there are also many persons well dressed. The stores are quite large, and we learn that Punta Arenas has a big trade. Some of its houses are comfortable. It has a theater, churches, and schools, and we are surprised at the modern improvements which exist in this almost unknown part of the globe. But we must not leave the Magellans without making a tour through the great archipelago south of the strait. It is composed of thousands of wooded islands which look very small on the map. Many of them are small, but altogether they contain as much land as Kansas, and several are quite large, Tierra del Fuego proper being as large as Ohio. It lies just across the strait from Punta Arenas. There is a tugboat which goes there 3 times a week, and upon it we take passage for Port Venir, a little town where the Chilean authorities on the island live. From here we make excursions by boat and land upon this curious country. The island of Tierra del Fuego has a rim of mountains around the greater part of it. The mountains rise in many places almost precipitously from the water, and upon them great glaciers hang down, now and then breaking off and falling into the sea with a terrible noise. The scenery is even grander than that of the strait, but the waters are often rough, and we have to move about very slowly. In some places we see men washing the sands on the shore for gold. There are gold ledges in some parts of Tierra del Fuego which run far out into the sea. Here, in time of storms, the gold dust and nuggets are often thrown up on the beach. The miners go out as far as they can at low tide and gather up the sand, looking carefully over it for gold. Some of the gold is found in lumps as big as marrow-fat peas. The precious metal, however, is difficult to get, and the men often work a long time in vain. But let us go inland and see something of the interior of Tierra del Fuego. What a rich vegetation there is everywhere! We thought it was all snow and ice. We imagined it must be the bleakest part of the globe. It is, however, far different. It is only on the tops of the mountains that the snow remains all year round, and the glaciers which move down their slopes are often bedded in green. The mountain slopes, for 1,000 feet up from the water, are covered with trees, ferns, and moss so thick that we can hardly crawl through them. How big the trees are! Some of the beeches are as tall as an 8-story building, and 6 feet in thickness. There are great magnolia trees and other trees somewhat like those of our central states. Nearly all of the trees are of the evergreen variety, and both trees and grass are green here the year round. Over the mountains there are great plains of rich grass, which in the summer are spotted with wild flowers. There are wild gooseberries and wild raspberries. Wild strawberries of large size are found in their season, and there are also wild grapes and wild celery. The sheep farmers raise cabbages, potatoes, turnips, and peas in their gardens, and the pastures are so good that the sheep quickly grow fat. We make our way inland to visit the sheep farms. The country in places is swampy and boggy, and as we ride on our horses over the plains we go very slowly because of the rats. The ground rats are one of the great pests of this region. They burrow through the earth, filling it with holes like a prairie dog town. They eat so much grass that the shepherds are anxious to destroy them. They do this by driving herds of cattle over the plains, which trample the rats to death. We find that the sheep are kept in flocks of 1,000 and 2,000. Each flock is allotted a piece of land about as large as one of our townships, and it is watched by its own shepherd on horseback. The shepherd has dogs to help him. Most of the dogs are Scotch collies, which are very intelligent. They understand their masters almost as well as though they understood language. When the shepherd makes a motion to the front, they run ahead. If he motions to the rear, they come back. And when he raises his hand in the air, they stop short. Other motions will send them to the right and left, and, in fact, as we see them driving the sheep this way and that in response to their master's orders, we think that human beings could not do better. The shepherds do not feed the sheep. It is their business to see that they do not get lost, to keep off the panthers and Indians, and to look out for the vultures. The sheep are so fat and heavy that when they fall down and roll over on their backs, they cannot get up. They lie there kicking. The vultures of Tierra del Fuego are very cunning birds, and when they see a sheep in this helpless condition, they swoop down upon him and pick out his eyes. The poor sheep is now blind. The vultures keep picking at him, and he soon dies. They now quickly tear off the skin and pick every bit of meat from the bones. It is the shepherd's duty to be on hand when a sheep falls and to help him to his feet again, and also to get him out of the bogs if he should fall in. Another great danger is from the Indians. Tierra del Fuego contains some fierce savages called Onas, who wage war with the shepherds and kill them whenever they can. They steal in at night and drive off the sheep in flocks of 500 or more, and when they get them far away in the forests, they have a big feast. The Indian bands are not large, and of course they cannot eat so many sheep at a time. They kill what are left over, however, and bury them in some deep stream or in the ground, leaving them there until the chase of the shepherds is over, when they go back and eat the decayed flesh. Are not these curious Indians? Yes, and strange to say, they are among the finest looking of the Indians of our hemisphere. The men are usually about 6 feet tall, and the women are of about the same height as our women. The Onas have high cheekbones, flat noses, and dark eyes. Their hair is black and straight. The men singe their heads close at the crown, and the women let their hair grow so it hangs down over their shoulders. The Ona Indians wear but little clothing, except loose skins which they wrap about their bodies. They live chiefly on the land, but do not like to stay more than a night or two in the same place, for they have an idea that the evil spirit is after them, and that they must move on or he will catch them. So they have no fixed homes. When they stop, they merely make a hole in the ground about 3 feet deep and weave branches over it. Here, at night, they crawl in and cuddle together, with their dogs about them for warmth. The chief weapons of the Onas are bows and arrows, and they get their food by hunting and trapping. Before we leave Tierra del Fuego we visit another tribe of Indians, which has now become partially civilized. This tribe is the Yagan, which are largely confined to the southern part of Tierra del Fuego. Its people are much like the Onas, except that they are smaller. They get their living from the sea rather than from the land. The Yagans eat mollusks, fish, birds, and fungi. They cook birds by putting red-hot stones inside of them and then placing the birds on the coals. They have an odd way of roasting eggs. They break a hole in one end of the egg and stand it upright in the ashes before the fire, turning it round and round to make it cook evenly. They are very good hunters, and the women are excellent fishers, being more fearless in the management of their boats and in swimming than the men. End of chapter 21.